So welcome to another episode of the Jobs for Women podcast. I am delighted to welcome our guest this week. We have Helen Tomlinson. Helen is the Government Menopause Employment Champion alongside her role as Head of Talent and Inclusion at the Adecco Group. So this is a brand new appointment by the government, and Helen's role will be to advise on how to improve workplace support for women experiencing menopause symptoms. Helen will work closely with the Department of Work and Pensions as well as the Women's Health Ambassador, Dame Leslie Regan. Welcome to the podcast, Helen.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, honestly, I know we were just talking off camera, but I am really grateful because I know you're super duper busy, just like I said in the intro. You've got many hats. The juggle is real.
I have. The juggle is real.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how the role came about? Because I know you've obviously got your full-time role, but very busy woman. How did the Menopause Champion, Government Champion come about?
So a number of ways. I guess the starting point is probably how it came about, and then maybe how I came to be in the role, I guess. So the first part of the question is there was a report written by the 50 Plus Choices Group, which is a government department looking at how to retain over 50s in the workplace and encourage people over 50 to come back into the workplace. So part of their report was to say that they felt that having a menopause employment champion was a really critical role to be able to work with employers to make them more menopause friendly, both to reduce the number of women leaving, but also to encourage. Currently there's 630,000 women on universal credit between the ages of 45 and 55, and to get some of those back into the workplace, having more employers that understood menopause, perimenopause, etc., even just that fundamental terminology is a big step. So it was their recommendation, and the other recommendation came from the Women and Equality Select Committee, who wrote a very detailed paper to government and making some suggestions around menopause in the workplace. One of them was to have a champion, and obviously government took that recommendation on board. I guess how I got to be the champion. So as you quite rightly said, I've got a day job. I'm the Head of Talent and Inclusion for the Adecco Group. We are one of the largest recruitment organisations in the UK and Ireland and globally. And I launched our menopause policy in October 2021 on World Menopause Day. And as part of that, I was lobbying government for change so around menopause. So I was speaking to a lot of MPs, obviously a lot of employers. We did a roundtable event on International Women's Day. And as a casual sort of throwaway comment at the end of it, it was about menopause in the workplace. But at the end of it, I said we had about 250 employers in the virtual audience. And I just said, if anybody would like help writing their policy, just drop me a line. And I was inundated with employers saying, we don't have a policy. How do you do it? How do you launch it? How do you embed it? So I kind of spent the rest of 2022 having those conversations with employers, at the same time having conversation with government to say, you know, it's just not good enough. What more can we do? So then in January of this year, I got a call from DWP inviting me on a call, and they started talking about the champion role. And so obviously with my recruiter hat on, nearly 30 years recruitment experience, I'm writing down all the details of the job, effectively taking the job on, as we would say in recruitment. And he got to the end and he said, so what do you think? And I was like, oh, you want me to do it? It was like, yeah, but I thought I was taking the spec to find somebody. So it was just all a bit crazy. But yeah, obviously I had to speak to Adecco, who've been incredibly supportive because they're passionate about the ED&I as well. Yeah, I went to a meeting with the minister and she said, are you ready for this? And I said, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just escalated and evolved phenomenally since then.
Oh, congratulations. I love stories like that, the big build up and then it's like, what do you think? Are you ready to start? That's so, I love that.
Thank you.
And was that from, so like when you think, because I'm really passionate about when I think about periods, so I've always had really, really bad periods. I'm really passionate about speaking about it at work and not hiding away when you're feeling absolutely terrible. Did the work that you're doing, like at Adecco, when you launched the menopause policy, is that from your own personal experiences or through chatting to friends? Or
partly from my own personal experience. So I went through perimenopause, that I didn't know it was perimenopause because I didn't know the word, back in about 2017, 2018. And my employer at the time, I think, felt like they were doing some really, making some reasonable adjustments, which they were. My office was all glass, so it was like a greenhouse. So I kept saying, I'm really, really hot. And one morning I came in, and they got a big fan on a stand, and they put Helen's fan, do not move, on a sticker on the fan. So they were like, we've got you this. I said, that's amazing, thank you. However, every time I went to a meeting, I had to drag the fan with me. But what happened was everybody was saying, I'm hot, how come you've got a fan and I haven't got a fan? And I kept having to reiterate my story all the time, which, if I'd not been such a confident person, could have really destroyed me. So I do always say to employers, don't make assumptions about what reasonable adjustments somebody may want. Ask the question, have the conversation. So it was partly from my experience, but I also feel really, really strongly that even at that time, I was in a privileged role where I could make choices myself. So prior to that point, I did struggle with really, really heavy periods, which 44% of women going through perimenopause do. And it's one of the topics that you are least likely to feel comfortable saying to your manager, I can't come in today because, quite honestly, I didn't stand up, let alone make the journey to the office, sit in the office, do my job, etc. So I felt really lucky. I could, organize my own diary. I was in a sales role. I could make my own appointments, etc. But my best friend is a nurse. She's a sister in the second busiest accident and emergency department in the UK. Through COVID, head to toe in PPE, she had no choices. I've got friends who are classroom assistants who work in call centres with limited opportunity to make those choices. So I feel really passionately that support and cultural change needs to be for everybody, not just people who have the flex. And that's why my strategy is very sector specific, top down, bottom up. But yeah, partly my personal experience, but I'm talking more and more about women's health more broadly, because I think that period conversation is really important, and it's just never really got off the ground almost. And the number of young girls who stop playing sport because of their periods, because they just haven't got the confidence to say, I don't think I'm going to really perform this week, so I'm not going to play. And that comes right into the workplace. The correlation between young girls experiencing sport or carrying on sport and then getting into C-suite roles is a really strong correlation. And the whole feeling comfortable having that conversation in the workplace is really important. And in order to do that, I did launch a policy. But in hindsight, it's not the policy that's made the change. The policy was a vehicle almost to start the conversation that has changed the culture of the organisation. But actually, it was probably myself and two other senior leaders doing a podcast like we are, talking about our symptoms and how they impacted on us on a day-to-day basis, and the loss of confidence, thinking, can I really do this job? Most women in FTSE 500 companies, the average age of a woman going into a leadership role is 54. In other organizations it's slightly younger. So it's such a pivotal time in your career. You've probably just got the biggest job of your life. You could have brain fog, feel anxious, loss of confidence. All of those things are really impactful. And I think us talking about that, and me talking about the heavy periods, the more practical aspect of it, that's what opened up the conversation. And and it's taken time for sure. you know, I didn't suddenly find that everybody in the Adecco Group was talking about menopause and periods, but over a period of time, we've seen how the conversation has changed. And what that has allowed us to do is start to talk about other really difficult topics through our ED&I forums and committee. And we've started it very often with lived experience, whether that's been in a podcast setting or in our inclusion brunches that we have every week. And, you know, the topic is, tell us about your experiences and let's open up that conversation. And it works so well for us.
Oh, I love that. It's so refreshing, because a term I use a lot is like breaking down you know, the barriers. And it's like, when we were talking about periods, then like I laugh, because on my wedding day speech, my dad actually referenced growing up and saying he could have been a gynecologist because he was so in tune with my mum and I. And now my kids, like, if I'm getting, I don't know, a tampon or whatever, and they're like, what's that? I'm like, well, let's talk about that, because there's nothing to hide. And I feel like it's the same like principle. So like you said, you know, a company, especially if it's an SME, they might do the tick box, they might create a policy and they might put it in the drawer, but it's before you even do that, it's like opening up the conversations.
Absolutely.
Let's be real. Let's just have a chat. What are you going through? It just makes sense. The thing that I really wanted to get into is because a lot of the women that we work with that are in our membership, we did a women at work survey, you know, a lot of the women that have sort of come to me work in like traditionally male dominated industries. I'm trying not to say that as much, because I'm kind of like, you know, but you know, maybe there
are your male dominated industries still.
So like architects, surveyors, you know, if they're in a room full of men, even though we're saying, yeah, let's try and be open, like you talked about your example earlier, you know, you were in a privileged position where you could be open about the fan, but there's some women that perhaps don't have the confidence, or they're surrounded by men. What advice would you give to those women?
So that's one of the other reasons that I took this role, partly for people who didn't have the opportunity that I did, and I feel utterly privileged to have the platform, the opportunity, the confidence to speak up for women who haven't got those but desperately need it or would like it. So there are the women that don't have the choices about, you know, the reasonable adjustments, etc., and just have to get on with it. But also I had an experience of talking to a lady who worked in it was like a pupil referral unit for young people excluded from school. And she ran like a charity radio station. And she said to me, how do I start a conversation with my line manager? He's a 32-year-old DJ. How do I say to him, you know, I'm not sleeping, I'm anxious, I'm sweating, I'm itching, you know, where do I go with that conversation? And there's a lot of, that's partly why I'm creating the strategy that I am through my government work, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But I'm doing more and more. I'm being asked more and more to go into organisations where it is predominantly male in senior leadership roles. I'm lucky we're 70% female in the Adecco Group, and from leadership level right through. However, I know, indeed. There are many organisations that aren't. So often they ask me to go in because, and I'll be really honest and say, you'll never see me again. So ask me anything. I just want you to ask anything that you don't feel comfortable asking, you know, HR, your EDI team, whatever that looks like. A lot of organisations don't even have them. So I do that a lot as well. But I also do like men only safe space conversations. So as an example, DWP at senior leadership are something like 89% male. So, and then the next level down is predominantly female. So they need to know how to, if we're empowering women to make them confident enough to start the conversation with their line manager needs to know how to receive the conversation to get it to the next level and get the support that they need. So doing those male only sessions has worked really, really well. And invariably, I did one for DWP a few weeks ago. We had over 500 male senior leaders on it. And all it takes is one person. And again, I say, you'll never see me. Nothing can embarrass me. Ask me anything you want to. And once one person's asked a question, it opens up that conversation. And invariably, it's not just about the workplace, but actually, I don't really care because, you know, everybody will know somebody. And, you know, like your dad, obviously honest and open conversation, that's what it takes. So they will all have you know, a mum, auntie, friend, relative, partner, whatever, that they need to know what the experience is like to be able to support them as well. So I've seen a real step change in the adoption of those sessions from from where I was you know, like 2 years ago. Definitely
such a great idea, that having the men in the space, and I love that it's like one question and then
absolutely
they all just feel like they've got the space to do it.
And I kick it off with what I call menopause bingo. So I say, write down all the symptoms that you know. They usually come up with 4 or 5, and they're usually the most widely known symptoms, or the ones that maybe impact on them the most. But yeah, and then when I talk about go through the whole symptom checker, it's just such you know, an aha moment, really, that they'd no idea the breadth of the symptoms that somebody could experience. So yeah, they do work really well.
It's brilliant. I love it. This is so refreshing. And let's face it, 51% of the population are going to experience it. I do wonder though, like when I think back, you know, when you think about like the generations, like my mum's a nurse, Pardy, you know, cracks on, and then my grandma, and it's kind of like, you do get this kickback sometimes, don't you, that, oh, it's, you know, back in our day, you know, we cracked on, and I think that's happening a lot in the D&I space at the moment. But I love this movement that's happening. And on the Women's Hour podcast that you did, you talked about the allyship piece, which I really resonate with, because again, going back to me and my periods, you know, I've got mates that have never had a period pain in their life, but it's kind of like that, I got you, I understand, what is it for you? So what I wanted to ask is, you know, like when we're talking about the men understanding, it's just having that understanding changes everything, doesn't it? Because if someone comes to you with symptoms, you know, to ask the right questions and how to support them. So yeah, tell us about, so if there's a company, you know, if there's a woman in a company that you know is maybe male dominated, or even a woman that does a female boss, a woman boss that doesn't understand, what are you doing to help companies like that, maybe smaller companies or male dominated, through the government role?
So absolutely, I can absolutely tell you about that. But just on the allyship piece, often men, once they've been educated, are the best allies. And sometimes it's women, like you say, who haven't had that experience, that are more dismissive, that it's a little bit like, just get on with it, because I haven't experienced that. But, you know, 50% of women experience some problematic symptoms. 25% of women don't have any. 25% have really, I think the term is bothersome symptoms, which is probably not a word that I would have picked, but that is, you know, so there is a real span. And those 25% that didn't have any symptoms can sometimes be a little bit dismissive of those that haven't. So that allyship piece is really important. So what I'm doing to support everybody, regardless of you know, size of organization, you know, 99% of organizations are actually SMEs, and 3/5 of the workforce work in an SME. So I'm pulling together roundtable groups, so across 5 key sectors that government want me to focus on, and they are hospitality, retail, manufacturing, adult care sector, and professional and technical. And the reason that we're focusing on those are because that pretty much encompasses. I want to look at education as well, because, you know, particularly primary education, 98% female, but we need to look at the best practice across those first and then overlay it into different sectors. So the purpose of those sector roundtables will be, they will have the sector bodies supporting them. So as an example, in hospitality, it'll be UK Hospitality. And what they will do is look at best practice in that sector. And then we have a portal that we will upload best practice onto it, guidelines, etc., so that people in smaller organizations can look at what larger organizations in their sector, and the reason it's sector specific is because the challenges in the sector can be different, what's working well in that sector that they could then use in their organization. So it'll be predominantly free resource. So the British Standards Institute has brought out their menstruation, menstrual health and menopause standard about 3 weeks ago, and that is free for anybody to be able to use who wants to use that. So guidance like that is accessible whatever size of employer. The second thing will be an allyship program, which again, as an example, you work in a small hotel in Blackpool, you've got nobody to talk to, but you could reach out to somebody who works in Whitbread Premier Inn. So you've got somebody to talk to about what they're experiencing and what you're experiencing. So that allyship program across sector to again capture anybody regardless of socioeconomic demographic, culture, ethnicity, size of employer, size of HR budget, size of EDI budget, it doesn't matter. That resource and support will be there for them. The third aspect of it is the pledge or accreditation, which I think is really important for women coming back into the workplace. So those 630,000 on UC, if they want to come back into the workplace and they left and then they've become perimenopausal, that's just another confidence barrier. So to be able to go and work for an employer who's signed the menopause pledge, I think that's a real positive to give that confidence and comfort. And the final part is obviously a comms plan, so that there's no point employers doing all this work and not being able to communicate it to anybody who might need it. So that is my plan, and my plan is very specific because it supports regardless of size of organisation and size of budget.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I love that it's sector specific because, like we said, I work from home, I've got my own business, and I have that flexibility, but so many people don't, do they? It's tough.
Absolutely.
It's
really tough.
Yeah.
And often there isn't anything that, as I referenced earlier, my friend is a nurse. She had literally no choice, but she also couldn't even say to anybody, this is how I feel, and not being able to articulate that just from a confidence perspective, or, knowing that conversation will be acknowledged, received, etc., is a really big part of it.
Yeah, that's huge. And massive respect for working through COVID, like NHS frontline, unbelievable. So we know that 1 in 4 women are considering leaving. So they've obviously had it in, and we know over 1 million, it must be way over 1 million now, have already left. Do you think companies, because obviously what we do at Jobs for Women is all about gender equality for women at work, so gender pay gap comes into it. Do you think companies piece that together? Like, we've got all these incredible, highly experienced women at the peak of their career, not supported, therefore potentially leaving, going part-time, or maybe going for another role. Do you think they're linking it? Like, okay, our gender pay gap is huge. What are we going to do about it?
Well, I think they're starting to, but so much work to do. I mean, according to the McKinsey report of 2022, women are leaving the workplace at the fastest rate ever from leadership positions. And the problem with that is younger women are not seeing being a leader as being aspirational, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. So if they're not seeing those role models, that mentorship, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that it'll get less and less. And you only have to look at the headwinds that women face, and the motherhood penalty and all of that, piecing all of that together. And it's not really surprising that leadership is not an aspiration of young girls now, but that dial absolutely needs to change. And when the women who have left the workplace, the majority of them in leadership roles have left because of the psychological aspects of menopause, not necessarily the practical aspect of it, because I think, like, you know, more often than not, the flexibility, the experience to be able to self-manage the issues, you know, whether it comes down to experience, knowledge, education, financial, etc. But you know, they've chosen to step away because of the lack of confidence. So, you know, maybe feeling that they can't do that level of role anymore. And I've talked to numerous women who've either stepped into a lower paid role, had a career change, gone part-time, all of which impacts on their personal finance, the economy, their pension pot, and their, you know, feeling of fulfillment and confidence. And, you know, why should they have to step down?
Yeah, and also, like, we need to be working a lot longer, you know.
It's getting longer all the time, isn't it? So yeah, absolutely. Why not be at the top of your game? Because I feel if organizations provide the support, and there is some personal stuff, I think, that you can't just say, I'm menopausal, help me, employer. There's a lot of lifestyle aspects of it that I come into that as well. But you absolutely should be able to thrive in the last sort of 10, 15, could even be 20 years of your career now, looking at how long we're going to have to work. But yeah, you absolutely, once you get past that, when you're in post-menopause, I honestly believe that you will thrive and, you know, perform and fulfill your potential at a level that you never have before.
So it's important then for companies to really have a plan in place for
Absolutely.
welcoming women that have taken a break back into the workforce. Yeah. Do you think that if a woman has made the decision, whether she's had support or not, to leave, whatever her circumstances, do you think that if on an exit interview or when she's sort of handed in a notice, do you think it's too late for a company to sort of support her? Do you think they need to be acting at perimenopause, and, you know, or do you think there's time to salvage, you know, because retaining an employee is huge, it's expensive,
it's absolutely huge. I honestly think, I use the example that if somebody came to me now and said, please come and see our menopause policy, I would think that we'd failed, because actually that is your last opportunity, isn't it? Because you only look at the policy if you don't feel that you've been supported. So I think to do that U-turn at that point for an employer, it's almost, you know, it almost too late. They need, and I think about how when an organization goes on that journey, previously it's taken a while to get going. I think there's so much more conversation now in the public domain around menopause that it's probably easier to get the traction than it maybe was even 2 years ago. I think back to an all men management training session that I did on menopause 2 years ago. I had 2 men dial into it, and one of them had dialed onto the wrong call and was too embarrassed to dial off. But now I'm being asked to do that. So I think the step change is phenomenal, but I actually think it needs to be starting much earlier than that. And some early onset menopause can happen at any time. So actually, and if you suffer with polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, it can happen earlier anyway. So until we started talking perimenopause, it was a bit like, well, I haven't got anybody who's 50 in my workplace, so I don't need to think about menopause. But actually, the 10 years before that, the average age is still 51, but the average age to start perimenopause is 41. So, having those conversations with a younger group of employees is really important, and including, we've got 5 generations in our workforce. So to start the conversation about, period management, all of those things means that you never really need to have that. Hopefully in the future, somebody's leaving because they've not been supported through menopause. So it's just such a broad education piece. But I would like to say that if somebody came to me and said, I'm leaving because of menopause, I would be devastated if somebody came to me in my day job. But I think an employer can always use that conversation as a starting point to say, we're clearly not doing enough. Stay, work with us. What would it look like for you? What can we do to make that difference? And reach out and get some support to really put those foundations into the business.
Yeah, I love that. Like, work with us and we'll help you. You can help us. Let's make change. So I know we've got to wrap up now. Advice, just quickly. I know we've talked a little bit about a woman that's maybe going through it. If she's listening, if there's a woman listening to this now that's really struggling and doesn't know, how to speak to her employer, is there anywhere she can go to get advice, support?
There are, I would say drop me into my LinkedIn messages and I will respond. I can give lots of guidance. There's lots of different websites. We are hopeful that the portal that I'm working on as part of my external piece will be up and running in October for World Menopause Day and Menopause Awareness Month. But please don't wait till October. Just reach out and I'll point you in the right direction.
Amazing. And then similarly for companies, if there's anyone that's leading up an SME or needs advice, what's their best port of call?
Again, it's not about competitive advantage. There is no way I would not share what we are doing internally. We've got the data that shows that it's adding value to our business and it's working. It's about making the world of work better for women everywhere. So if anybody wants any support and guidance, just drop me a note and, I'm really happy to have a conversation.
Oh, that is amazing. I love this. Let's all help each other. So I will drop your LinkedIn in the show notes. And that was, I could talk to you all day.
As I could you.
So thank you. I know I keep saying thank you, but I'm really grateful. I know you're busy, spinning lots of plates, doing incredible work. I am honoured that you've given us the time to come on the podcast. And keep doing what you are doing. So thank you.
I promise. Much. Thank you, Zoe. Lovely to talk to you.